Well, that's an interesting question. For original Torg, the Living Land book was the first book of the Cosms that came out. And I think it was kind of a mirror of that for Torg Eternity, that we wanted our first book to be about the Living Land. Also, the new Living Land book kind of makes a statement. It tells people how different Torg Eternity is from original Torg, while at the same time being very familiar. The approach that I took to designing the new Living Land book was to look at the old one and say, what are the parts of this that really work? What are the parts that are cool? And I'm going to turn those all up to 11. And then, look at it through a different lens. So the lens that I looked at the new Living Land through, it all kind of came together and clicked for me when I started thinking of it in the terms of this old TV show called Land of the Lost, which was very exciting to me as a kid. And it had dinosaurs, and it had a primeval world, and it was primitive adventure, but it also had these kind of weird lost civilization pieces, and it had lizardmen in it in the TV show that were Sleestaks. But when I was reading Living Land, whenever I saw the Adinos, that's what I was thinking of. It's like, oh, this is kind of cool. And the more I looked at the Living Land through that lens, the more I saw how you could update Christopher Kubisik's book, the original one, and turn it into this exciting spin on what he had created. So the funny thing is, I've always loved Torg. I thought Torg was a really cool game. But I honestly, I just had a really hard time understanding how to play it. When it first came out, I bought the box set, and I came home, and I read all the books, and I got the cards out, and I just couldn't quite, it just didn't quite click with me. And then I started working with a friend of mine, a man named Ed Stark, who was one of the designers of Torg. And Ed said, oh, well, if you don't know how to play, I will run it for you, and that way you can sort of understand. And so I got to play this game, and this is one of the few RPG games I got to play with my father. So it was really special for me. It was with my friend, it was with my father, and it was this game that I've always kind of wanted to learn. So it was a really, it was a great experience. And I said, oh, Torg is great. I love Torg, right? That was my moment where I sort of realized just how much I enjoyed the game. So when I had the opportunity to work on Torg Eternity with Shane Hensley, who is someone I really respect, and Marcus and Ulysses, I said, this is a great opportunity for me. This is something that I can give back to this game that I love so much. And I can do it by channeling that love of the unknown and dinosaurs and all that stuff that I loved as a kid from the Living Land, or sorry, from Land of the Lost, and translate that into what I had as my vision for the new Living Land. So that was absolutely what I was going through my mind when I said yes. Christopher Kubisik's book originally he was channeling kind of the lost world. He was channeling those sort of pulp adventures in the Pellucidar and places like that. And I get that, like I see that foundation, but for me, the exploration of the world is not about getting lost or the challenges of not having the right gear. For me, the exploration was sort of about finding the things that the jungle was hiding from you, those pieces of lost civilizations. And I love the idea that there was this goddess, Lanala, who was the goddess of life, and that she would use these pieces of lost civilizations to teach her people a lesson about relying on dead things as opposed to relying on surviving against the odds, or relying upon the forces of life. And I thought, that's a really cool angle. So the things that worked for me was the idea of primitive adventure, and the fact that the Living Land was this thick jungle full of dinosaurs and full of adventure. And I even like some of the pulp, angles that Kubisik took. But I again put them through that lens of the Land of the Lost and said, okay, so the Deep Mist, which was this thing that was very common and popular in the old book, I kind of said, okay, we're going to take that, we're going to make that much more of a side thing, because what the Deep Mist does is it gets you lost. It just basically means you're lost. And that can be a really cool moment. But we had this idea in Torg Eternity of how the Cosm cards would work. And by making the Deep Mist a Cosm card, you put that that power in the player's hands to the agency, the choice is theirs of whether or not it impacts you in play. And I thought, okay, now that's powerful, that's cool, that's taking an element that could be really, really frustrating and turning it into something that's really cool and immersive and brings you into the world. And we did that a lot with, the dinosaurs, like the very common card in Torg Eternity is Dinosaurs Attack, right? And you can play that card in the Living Land, and what happens is, it's a dangerous place, right? Dinosaurs are kind of around every corner, and they just will sometimes attack you. And I like that too. So the things that we changed, we built on the foundation of what had come before, but we also, we added this idea that the Living Land conceals pieces of lost worlds and lost civilizations. We added the idea that the High Lords are not just the rulers of all they have under their control, that they're struggling too with their own issues and their own problems. Shane Hensley had created this guy called Thrakmos, who is this priest of the dead, right? And he had undead dinosaurs, and his lizardmen, his Adinos, were wearing bones and using bone spears, and it was just this sort of like idea of a necromancer kind of in Torg. And I said, okay, so we'll have him be part of what's going on in the Living Land, and that sets up an interesting conflict because the High Lord, Baruk, he can't just rule with an iron fist. He has to sometimes negotiate. He has to sometimes turn away from what he's planning to do to deal with what's going on with Thrakmos, or to get involved with some of the other clans of Adinos that live in the Living Land. So yeah, we added some new spins and some new twists on what it was already there. And I think people are really going to enjoy seeing the Living Land through the same lens that I brought to my writing. So there are brand new talents. I think, are they called perks? I think it's called perks in Torg Eternity. And you can get those to give yourself a pet. Like in the Torg Eternity, like the core box, you get a saber-toothed tiger or a saber-toothed cat is your companion, and it's cool, right? But in the Living Land book, we have more options. You can have a dinosaur, you can have a saber-toothed tiger companion, not just a cat, but like a full-on tiger. You can get abilities that work off of your relationship with Lunala. If you are an Adinos, there's new types of things that you can do as an Adinos, which are really cool because they have their own culture. The Gotaks, which are they have two types of priests, Optants and Gotaks, basically life priests and death priests. But they all come together to serve their culture. They're not like the necromancers. They are just taking on the sins, if you will, of the tribe. There's certain spells that those guys get, right? Also, there's brand new archetypes because the Living Land is mostly in America, also partially in Canada and some down in Mexico. So you have new archetypes like a Canadian mounted police and hockey players and stuff like that. So we have some new archetypes, we have some new talents and perks, and we have definitely new equipment. In the Living Land, because it's spiritually charged, no other cosm has quite the same level of spirituality as the Living Land. And Lunala is a capital G goddess. Like, she is, real, okay? She makes miracles happen. So you can find items that are called sacred. They're sacred items, and they have power. It's not magical; it's spiritual power. But they're very similar in that they can enact miracles. There's a spear that can basically turn into a lightning bolt, to show the wrath of Lunala. There is also relics. There's pieces of those old civilizations. There was this group called the Ustana, which were these insect people before they shared the same world as the Adinos, and then the Adinos wiped them out. And so there's pieces of their civilization left behind because it caused great sorrow for Lunala when this happened. This was actually like a big deal for her. And one of the things they left behind was like this suit of armor called a war shell. If you can imagine like a suit of armor that's sort of like made out of an insect's exoskeleton, you can wear it, and it's quite powerful. Like it puts you on par with some of the best armor in the game, which it's rare, but it's awesome. So yeah, there's all kinds of new things for player characters as well as game masters in the Living Land book, and I haven't even touched on some of the cards. There's new cards for the Cosm deck. I mean, it's great. So yeah, absolutely keep an eye out for all the cool things you can do as a character who is part of this Land of Primitive Adventure. Oh, well, that's easy. The amount of stuff in this book is pretty crazy. We have a really detailed look at the Delphi Council because they started in America. And there's a lot of Delphi Council operations going on in the Living Land, which is going to be of great interest. There's a lot of information on, as I said, these new items and these new options for your player characters, but there's also going to be a lot of depth and info on North America, Canada, Mexico, where all this stuff is going on with regards to the reality war and the High Lords and how this is all playing out. So it's the first look you're going to have at Torg Core Earth, Torg Eternity Core Earth, I should say, which is taking place. I mean, the source books come out about a year after the invasion. So you've seen the day one, you've seen like 90 days after. Now you're going to see like what's happening on Core Earth a full year after the first invasion. That's what's really exciting about it.